So Jesus speaking about this generation, and this generation means the generation of his time 2,000 years ago, but all the way to our time as well. And he says it's like children who sit in marketplaces and call to one another, "We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge for you, but you did not mourn." And one of the beautiful things about Scripture is there's so many different ways that you can glean different truth. And a lot of times I look at this and I see that whole thing of the reality of a culture that's wanting to make Jesus dance according to their song, or make John the Baptist dance according to their song. And both John and the Son of Man were not willing to do that. And so it's important for us to remember both Jesus and those who point the way to Jesus have to be rooted on the rock of Christ, to be rooted on that truth, to be like, I think it says in the first reading, like a tree planted by running water that yields its fruit in due season, whose leaves never fade. Whatever he does prospers. That's what it means to be rooted in the Lord. And something really interesting is in Old English, the word for tree has the same root as trust and truth. Both of them, when you say you are very tree-ish in Old English, you're actually saying you're very trustworthy. And the reason for that is, think about a tree planted by running water. There's a certain permanence there. There's a certain trust. You can lean on that tree. You can put a hammock on that tree. That tree is not going to budge. And so in Old English, they use a very physical thing to say, this is what trust looks like. When we trust, we're rooted. And when we're trustworthy, we have a strength that doesn't move. And people are able to lean into that. And it's truthful. A trustful truth. And that's who Jesus is. So that's one way of understanding this little parable that Jesus says, is comparing the way of the world without Christ is like chaff. It's like the dust, the little particles left over after the harvest. If you've ever been driving down 126 and all those cornfields there, all the dust there, and when you get a big windstorm, all those things just float away. And that's what it's like to be just following the winds of time. But we have to be rooted on the bark of Peter, because that's where Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." So it's really that call to allow Jesus to be the tree, and leaning into him, you imitate him by being rooted into that same stream of life. Now, another way of understanding this passage, which is actually spoken of in the Magnificat publication, is it says this: "The children who refuse to dance or mourn represent souls that are anesthetized by self-absorption and doubt. The Son of Man, because of his great love, experienced both exquisite joy and profound sorrow." So going back to this reading, do you see how there's like different ways that you can glean these powerful truths that help us to understand our faith, help us to see the face of Christ? So these children are saying to one another, "We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge, but you did not mourn." And so when we hear joyful music and we don't dance, it's because we're focused in on ourselves, because we're not willing to receive something from the outside that allows us to move. So there's one way in which you can see kind of a negative understanding, but there's another way in which a generation that is not willing to be open to true joy or true sorrow. And isn't that our generation? We like to stay in the middle. We're uncomfortable with even talking about death. Have you ever noticed that? I notice this sometimes even within funerals or within, even kind of our burial process within this country versus, for instance, let's say the country of Mexico. You see a big difference where a lot of times in the kind of classic American culture, and I don't think it was always like this, you come to the burial site, the coffin is there, but then after you say your prayers, you go away and someone else does the burying. And it's kind of like you don't really see that part. If you go to a funeral in a Hispanic culture, that's actually one of the most profound moments, is they actually lower the casket into the ground. And then they take roses and they throw them in as a way of commending their loved one to the Lord. Sometimes they will even start that burial process. And there is profound sorrow. There is a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking cry. But they're able to tap into that reality versus sometimes maybe in our more American culture, we maybe have a fear of that. And we just want to have everything kind of stay at kind of a surface level. We don't want to experience profound sorrow, but in order to experience profound love, we have to be willing to experience profound sorrow. In order for us to experience profound joy, the joy of the resurrection, we have to be willing to experience the depths of the cross. And even if you were to study Dante's Divine Comedy, the way up is actually down. The story of Dante at the very beginning of his kind of awakening in the midlife of his life, and he's going through this profound winter of his soul. And he's thinking, I have the way up, and he's barred at that moment. And then the character Virgil comes and says, in order for you to experience heaven, you have to be willing to go down to the dregs. And so he goes down and experiences the depth of his brokenness by going into the inferno, which then leads to purgatorio, which brings a purification, and then it actually brings him up in this kind of mysterious way. To go down is actually to go up. To experience the cross is to experience the full power of the resurrection. That's why St. Faustina would say, she has this image of these three kinds of persons, and some of them are dragging their crosses, some of them are carrying their crosses, and some of them are fully crucified on their crosses. And Jesus says, do you see these souls? To the extent that they share in my passion and suffering is to the extent that they will share in my resurrection. And so this is another way of looking at this. Are we willing to enter into profound sorrow to encounter profound joy? Are we willing to go into profound joy, being open to the mystery of profound sorrow? And this is what a family is called to do, to cry together, to laugh together, to experience joy, to experience sorrow. And when we kind of snuff either of them under the bed, then there's something missing in that family dynamic. This is also why Vatican II, in Gaudium et Spes, which in much was written by St. John Paul II, said that the church's mission is to weep with those who weep, and laugh with those who laugh, to experience the joy and the sorrow found in the midst of the world. And that's what we're called to do as joy-filled evangelizers. That our family is the family of humanity as well. And we're called to bring this profound sorrow and joy together so that we cannot be like this generation, but be the generation of Christ. So let's ask the Lord for that grace. And maybe whatever area that we might need to look at, maybe we struggle with joy. Maybe we struggle with sorrow. Maybe, in a sense, we like to stay in that middle in which we don't really experience both of those sides. But again, in order to get the full experience of resurrection, you have to go down in order to go up.